Hello again, I'm Maurice Barratt and I've got 10 minutes with you, so let me start the clock. If we read our Bible with preconceived ideas, then we're going to fit the Bible to what we believe. Sounds great, but it's very dangerous because the traditions of men are often changed for the commandments of God. Jesus told the Pharisees off for this very thing. We should read the Bible with an open mind and see what it actually says. So here's a good example. If I ask you how long was Jesus in the grave, 90% of Christians, I'm sure, wouldn't hesitate to say, well, 3 days and 3 nights. That's because they've been told it's true. That's what preachers say. So then they try and fit it to suit. So they talk about the Jewish day starting in the evening and trying to work out how Jesus rose on a Sunday. They talk about the double Sabbath, the normal 7th-day Sabbath, and then the Sabbath of the Feast of the Passover, to make it fit to 3 days and 3 nights. However, this is the wrong way to approach it, because that's what they do with the evolution theory. They have a premise and they try and fit everything to fit it. It's the wrong way round. You must look at the facts and then make your thesis, your evaluation. So what does the Bible say? Well, there's only one scripture that says 3 days and 3 nights, and that's the scripture people use. But it can't be proved that Jesus was talking about how many days he'd be in the grave. We'll look at it in a minute. But every other scripture, without exception, from Jesus and the apostles, agree that Jesus would rise on the 3rd day. So when we compare scripture with scriptures, we've no other conclusion that he was not in the grave 3 days and 3 nights if he rose early the 3rd day. So why try and fit everything into one speculative scripture? Because we've been told and we don't look at the Bible. So all the Gospels say he rose very early in the morning. So let me look at the scriptures. I'm going to use many scriptures because that's our guide. Matthew 28 verse 1. In the end of the Sabbath, as it began to dawn towards the 1st day of the week, came Mary Magdalene and the other Mary to the sepulchre. Mark 16 verse 2, and very early in the morning, the 1st day of the week, that's Sunday, they came to the sepulchre at the rising of the sun. Luke 24 verse 1 and 2. Now, upon the 1st day of the week, very early in the morning, they came to the sepulchre, bringing the spices which they had prepared. And John chapter 20 verse 1. The 1st day of the week cometh Mary Magdalene early, when it was yet dark, unto the sepulchre. So they came very early. It must have been 4 or 5 in the morning when the light was just coming. So let's look at the scriptures in the 4 Gospels and see what Jesus said about his own time in the grave. They all say he rose on the 3rd day. And we know it was early when he rose. So let's look at the scriptures. Matthew 16 verse 21. From that time forth, Jesus began to show his disciples how that he must go to Jerusalem, suffer many things of the elders and chief priests and scribes, and be killed, and be raised again the 3rd day. Matthew 17 verse 23. And they shall kill him, Jesus talked about himself, and the 3rd day shall be raised again. Matthew 20 verse 19. And shall deliver him, Jesus talked about himself again, shall deliver him to the Gentiles to mock, to scourge, and to crucify him, and the 3rd day he will rise again. So up to now they've all said that he'll rise on the 3rd day, and we know it's very early in the morning. Mark 9:31. For Jesus taught his disciples and said unto them, the Son of Man is delivered into the hands of men, and they shall kill him, and after that he is killed, he shall rise the 3rd day. Mark 10:34. And they shall mock him, and shall scourge him, and shall spit upon him, and shall kill him, and the 3rd day he shall rise again. Luke 9:22. The Son of Man must suffer many things, be rejected of the elders and the chief priests and scribes, and be slain, and be raised the 3rd day. Luke 13:32. And Jesus said unto them, Go and tell that fox, Behold, I cast out devils, I do cures today and tomorrow, and the 3rd day I shall be perfected. Luke 18:33. And they shall scourge him and put him to death, and the 3rd day he shall rise again. Luke 24 verse 7. The Son of Man must be delivered into the hands of sinful men and be crucified, and the third day rise again. So everyone without exception from Jesus, he said he'd rise on the third day, very early as we know. Well, the disciples on the Emmaus Road, Luke 24 verse 21, they were walking with Jesus and they said, didn't know it was Jesus, we trusted that it had been he which should have redeemed Israel. And besides all this, today is the third day since these things were done. So Jesus was walking with them on the third day. And then Jesus said unto them, Luke 24:4-6, it is written, and thus it behoved Christ to suffer and to rise from the dead the third day. So those on the Emmaus Road were walking with Jesus on the third day. So it couldn't have been 3 days, 3 nights in the grave. The Pharisees said he'd rise on the third day because they'd heard what Jesus said. So Matthew 27, verse 62-64. Now the next day, that followed the day of the preparation, the chief priests and Pharisees came together unto Pilate, saying, Sir, we remember that deceiver said while he was yet alive, that 3 days I will rise again. Command therefore that the sepulchre be made sure until the third day, lest his disciples come by night and steal him away. Well, that's Jesus, that's the Pharisees, that's those on the Emmaus Road. What do the apostles say? Well, the apostles all say the same thing, that he rose on the third day. And we know it was very early. So Peter, talking to the first Gentile believers at Joppa, said this. It's Acts chapter 10 verse 40. Him God raised up the third day and showed him openly. Paul talking to the Corinthian believers, 1 Corinthians chapter 15 verse 4. Jesus was buried and he rose again the third day according to Scriptures. Now he's talking about the Old Testament Scriptures. When he says according to Scriptures, it was prophesied. So we know he rose very early in the morning before it was light, so he couldn't have been in the grave 3 days and 3 nights if he rose early on the third day. So how is it that everyone says that Jesus was 3 days and 3 nights in the grave? Well, it's because of this single scripture. And actually, Jesus was given a sign. The Pharisees didn't know what he meant by the statement, and it seems to me that Christians don't know either, because they've gone against all the scriptures that I've just read out that do talk about him rising on the third day. So let's look at this scripture that people use, this single scripture. The context is the judgment of Israel when Jesus returns. He's talking about his return, how he's going to judge Israel, and he's talking about a wicked generation, the one that he lived in. Matthew 12 verse 39-41. Jesus answered and said unto them, an evil and adulterous generation seeks after a sign. There shall no sign be given to it but the sign of the prophet Jonas. For as Jonas was 3 days and 3 nights in the whale's belly, so shall the Son of Man be 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth. Funny turn of phrase that, isn't it? The heart of the earth. And then he lets you know the context. The men of Nineveh shall rise in judgment with this generation and shall condemn it, because they repented at the preaching of Jonas, and behold, a greater than Jonas is here. He says it later in another incident, Matthew 16 verse 4, a wicked and adulterous generation seeks after a sign, and there shall be no sign given to it but the sign of the prophet Jonah, and he left them and departed. So he doesn't mention 3 days and 3 nights there, he just says the sign of the prophet Jonah. He lets them work it out, and they don't know what he's talking about. Luke 11:29-31, this is the same scripture as in Matthew. When the people were gathered thick together, he began to say, this is an evil generation, they seek a sign, and there shall no sign be given it but the sign of Jonah the prophet. For as Jonas was a sign to the Ninevites, so shall also the Son of Man be to this generation. So he was saying this was a sign, and only one scripture in Matthew does it mention 3 days and 3 nights. So what was the sign of Jonas and the warning of judgment? Well, I believe it was the time that they buried him until the time he appears again. It's 3 days and 3 nights is symbolic prophecy of when they buried Jesus and when they see him again. Jonah, when he came to Nineveh the first time, He never got that. He was swallowed up by a whale. So they never saw him. Just as when Jesus appeared the first time to Israel, he may as well have got swallowed by a whale because they never saw him. They buried him. But when Jonah came the second time, they acknowledged him. And when Israel accept Jesus the second time, the whole nation will be saved in a day, like Nineveh. So Hosea prophesied a similar thing to Israel. But of course, Israel won't see it until he returns and shows himself. Hosea 6:2, after 2 days will he revive us. In the third day will raise us up and we shall live in his sight. That's to support my premise that it's 3 days and 3 nights, the time that Jesus was buried till he appears again to Israel. Well, I'm convinced by the overwhelming evidence of Scripture that he rose early on the third day. And the sign of Jonah is a prophecy, not literally how long he was in the grave. Of course, you'll have to decide for yourself. Well, I hope I've provoked you to look at Scripture with an open mind and not with your doctrinal, denominational glasses on. Have a wonderful week. The time's gone. God bless you.